sorry about that for those that are watching the recording. We're starting just a little bit late, but there's no important information that you missed at this point. Olden Produce, Oneida Nation, Peck and Bushel Fruit Company, the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior Chippewa Indians, Red Door Family Farm, Awesome Sweet Corn, Seasonal Harvest, the Stockbridge Muncie Community, Superior View Farms, Vitruvian Farms, the Wisconsin Farmers Union, the Wisconsin Food Hub Cooperative, and Wello. And it looks like, Leah, you've got your hand up, so please feel free to unmute and share.
Yeah, I was just wondering if somebody could let Jen in. She's in the lobby trying to get in. Oh, I'm sorry, Leah is here.
Yes.
Hello everyone. Leah Zaizi from Ohilagu, and that was just my mom talking too. And I just wanted to share about our project that we grow our traditional white corn, and our project is to establish a post-harvest processing facility and adjacent commercial kitchen to produce value-added products with traditional corn.
Awesome, thank you. I'm not seeing anyone in the lobby. Chad, are you?
No, I'm not able to see the lobby, I believe.
Laura, did you hear from Jen that she's in the lobby but can't?
Yeah, that's what she said. She said, tell them I'm in the lobby. I'm waiting for the host to open. So maybe she's in a different meeting. I'll resend the meeting invite to her. Sorry to interrupt your meeting.
No worries. Maybe have her leave and try to join again, and I'll see if she pops up. Does anyone else want to share? Thank you, Leah. Okay, moving right along. So what your proposals did, what your projects are going to do: expand market access for Wisconsin producers and products, demonstrate local support, address compelling middle of the food supply chain issues, problems, and needs, adhere to the program guidelines set forth by the USDA. They are clearly articulated and cohesive projects that support underserved communities and producers, and that overall build system resilience. So we're really excited. And just a map denoting where all of you are. The blue markers are in our equipment only project recipients, and you can find the full list of those recipients on our webpage. It was also in the press release if you received that. And then the folks on this call today are represented by the green markers. So we have a pretty good geographic spread across the whole state, which is awesome that it worked out that way. We will be conducting site visits at some time, so I look forward to driving around the entire state to see all of you. But yeah. Okay. Now we're going to move into kind of the meat of this presentation. Oh no, where'd it go? Okay. The reimbursement process. And this is really Chad's wheelhouse, but he's under the weather, so I'm going to do the presenting for this, and hopefully I don't miss anything. So a complete reimbursement is the combination of the cover sheet, which we'll show you in just a second. That is basically used to summarize your reimbursement request. And it's supported by documentation or supporting material, which serves to document the expenses that you've incurred and are seeking reimbursement for. And the combination of these items should allow an outside party, like the DATCP Finance Bureau, for example, to easily connect the expenses to your grant contract and verify their existence. And I just wanted to point out as a reminder that the level of scrutiny may sometimes feel high, but we have to remember that we're working with taxpayer dollars here, so we need to work together to make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed before payments can be issued. So starting with the foundation of an eligible reimbursement request or match contribution, is the expense program eligible? And we've pretty much already been through this step as eligibility was determined through the review process. But as expenses will naturally shift slightly from what was originally budgeted, we always have to keep that in mind and make sure that we're adhering to all of the program guidelines laid out by DATCP, USDA, federal grant rules, etc. Is the expense budgeted for in your contract? So if it's neatly already listed in your contract and we're able to connect your expense basically one-to-one for what's listed, this item won't be an issue. However, we do understand that costs will change slightly or sometimes fairly significantly. And our best advice, the golden standard, best practice would be to reach out to us in the event that any expense differs from your contract in any way. Not necessarily the price. Like, for example, if a piece of equipment has gone up by $1,000, like you don't really need to run that by us. But if it changes, if the piece of equipment changes in type or variation, you have to hire a new contractor, your construction plans change slightly, please let us know as soon as you know, so then we can determine whether those expenses will still be covered in your existing contract or if a contract amendment is in order. And I'll go into that just a little bit more later on in the presentation. Next, you'll need an itemized receipt or invoice. And the word itemized is key here. It's Chad's job and then our finance department's to connect the expenses for which you're requesting reimbursement to the contract that we have with you. So the more closely receipts and invoices align with your budget tables, the less we have to do to get your reimbursement approved. If we're able to connect one for one, XYZ contractor, the price matches, or you're requesting reimbursement for part of that price and you explain which part and why, then we're unlikely to have follow-up questions, and it's going to be a much quicker process. So having things itemized and clear is really important. Next, you'll need a proof of payment. When we see that a transaction has taken place, then we have the opportunity to understand that the funds have left your account, and the federal dollars will then be used to reimburse the amount that you've already expended. This is needed to meet our legislative auditing bureau requirements and ensures that we're replacing funds expended under the rules laid out by the grant. And then finally, is the information accurate and complete? When we look at a reimbursement cover sheet and the material submitted, we must ensure that the items, totals, and dates correlate with one another. Basically just making sure that everything makes sense and lines up with everything else. So kind of like I've already mentioned, but just to reiterate, the more organized your reimbursement requests are, the quicker the turnaround, the faster you'll be paid. These types of reimbursement requests will typically be processed within 30 days upon the RFSI team's approval. But the timeline is entirely dependent on the information that we receive and the documentation that you submit. Okay, so these are the items that are required for a complete reimbursement. The completed cover sheet, which I'll walk you through in just a second, an itemized receipt or invoice, which serves to show the price or the cost of whatever item you were hoping to purchase or did purchase using or under your contract. And then the proof of payment, which, like I mentioned, works to show that the funds have already been transferred to the vendor or the contractor or the employee, whoever. So an itemized receipt would be a proof of payment because it would show that your remaining balance was zero. And those are usually best suited for smaller purchases made with a credit card. Other examples include a QuickBooks ledger, which connects a provided invoice number and date to a payment associated with the expense. An endorsed check, which would illustrate the intent to transfer the funds from your organization to whomever. And kind of the gold standard is a bank statement, whether that's a screenshot from your desktop browser showing your bank account or a paper copy, whatever, which shows the transfer of funds from your account, because it allows us to see definitively that the funds have been moved from your bank to the vendor, whomever. It's also really important to note that the same materials and process is required for match expenses. So we are documenting your matching contribution kind of in line with your reimbursement request. So anything that was expended in a given period of time for which you're submitting a reimbursement request, you're going to document everything that's being counted towards your matching contribution in the exact same way. The only difference is that you won't receive reimbursement for it. It will just be documented as having been counted towards your contribution. So is everyone able to see? Can someone just let me know if you can see this screen now?
We can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it looks like we have a hand raised. Lou, do you want to unmute?
Good afternoon, Grace, and this is Lou Hing from Feeding America Eastern Wisconsin. In our contract or agreement, we included a bunch of staffing time in there. How do you substantiate the staff time in the
Great question.
reimbursement request?
We're going to get to that.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay, so this is the cover sheet, and you all received this as part of the digital packet that Chad sent you when he sent your fully executed contract. So this will already have some information for your organization already filled out, your supplier ID, your organization name, mailing address, etc. What you are going to fill out on this sheet whenever you submit a reimbursement would be your contract number, if that's not already listed, the date that you're submitting it, and then the period covered by the claim. So whether that's a month, whether that's 2 months, whether that's 2 weeks, whatever, the period of time that captures all of the expenses represented by the cover sheet will be listed there. Then you're not really going to touch this part of the table at all. Anything that you're entering in will be entered on the detail sheet tab, and that's where you'll put in you'll select the expense category. So they're already pre-filled out for you here. You just have to select one from the dropdown. You will then list the invoice. So we're going to use, oh shoot, I'm sharing a window, not a screen. 1 second.
For invoice, you would just put the who you're purchasing that item from, just to let you know.
Okay, so you would match it up with the vendor or whomever. So XYZ surplus would go in the invoice column. The invoice number would be reflected in this column. The date of the invoice, 1/3, would be reflected in this column. And then you would describe the expense to the best of your ability. That could just be as simple as the description that's listed on the invoice. If you need any sort of calculation, like for indirect, which is something that we'll go through in just a second, you would put that here. Or if you're using a separate file to document a certain calculation or expense, such as the personnel and fringe Excel document, which I'll show you in just a second, you could list that there. Then the amount claimed is the total amount expended, which then you would divide between grant funds and match funds, or just place in one of the 2 categories. And then when you fill this sheet in, it automatically populates in the cover sheet. And this is what we look at as kind of the summary of everything that's either being requested for reimbursement or being contributed towards match. So I will get back to the presentation. Darn it. Sorry, a lot of back and forth.
And just as a side note, we uploaded a video on how to fill out the cover sheet on the DATCAP RFSI website there. It should be the 3rd bullet point.
Okay, so like Chad mentioned, there are some resources listed on the website. The reimbursement guide, which is like a 10 or 12-page document that provides standard operating procedures for successful reimbursements. So that walks you through everything, honestly, and probably more detailed than you even need to know. But if you have a specific question or want to read more in depth about anything that we're talking about here, if it makes more sense for you to read the process rather than watch me change through a bunch of Excel spreadsheets, that's there for you. There's also tutorials like Chad just mentioned, which he made some video guides that kind of walk you through everything that we're going through right now. There's the grant management tool, which I'll show you in just a second. It's optional. It's just for your use, but Chad created it to assist with tracking grant expenses, reimbursements, project outcomes for documentation later on in performance reporting. So that's a helpful Excel piece that you can optionally use, and that was sent along with that package of files as well. And then there are a couple of Excel files that, to answer Lou's question, you would use to document your personnel and fringe time and payments, as well as your travel payments, which we'll walk through in just a second here. When submitting a reimbursement, you would send scans or screenshots of your supporting material, as well as that cover sheet that I just showed you, as individual file attachments to the DACAP RFSI inbox, which you've been using to communicate with us this whole time. And then, like I already said, the same reporting and documentation is required for match expenses as well. So make sure that you're keeping track of everything that is being contributed towards match as listed in your contract, and maintaining all of the documentation for submission alongside your request for reimbursements. And then be sure and look for follow-up questions from Chad or I after submitting your reimbursement request, just in case there's anything further that we need from you, if there's any clarifications on anything. We review those as soon as they come to the inbox, so you should see questions within a couple of days following your submission, if we flag anything. Otherwise, Chad will just let you know that it's being routed through the approval process. Okay, so then, like Lou asked, if an itemized receipt or invoice is not available, what would you do? So for construction materials, hired contractor time, purchase supplies, it's obviously not hard to imagine the receipt or invoice that you would receive to complete a transaction. But for the budget categories of personnel, fringe, travel, and indirect costs, expenditures are not usually or ever captured in that kind of document. So for these categories, documentation of certain calculations will be required, which I'll walk you through. I'm not going to go into the travel reimbursement Excel file because it's really straightforward, but there's a screenshot of it there. That document you already have as well from that folder that Chad sent you, but it will be on our website, so you can re-download that at any time.
Oh,
but we will
just a heads. Oh,
yep.
Sorry, that one wasn't included in your folder, but that will be on the website though.
Oh, sorry about that. So you can download that one from the website. All of this stuff will be on the website, whether or not it was in the package of files. Chad just wanted to get that out ahead of the grantee gathering in case people were ready to submit for reimbursements. Okay, now we'll go into the personnel and fringe Excel file. Can you see that, Chad?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so it has these tabs down at the bottom. If you have more than 5 personnel, which I'm not sure, some of you may, you can just create copies of these tabs to represent each of the different people. You can rename them to the people's names if you want. But the important part is that these yellow boxes in the document are filled out, and then this document is sent alongside your cover sheet document, and that's what we're using to verify and reimburse for personnel and fringe hours. So what you would do is put in the employee name as it's listed in your contract. If employees change at all, if someone leaves and that position is being filled by someone else, please just let us know as soon as possible, so then we can reflect that in your contract, and be sure that the right person who's actually doing the work is being counted towards either your matching contribution or for reimbursement. So you would list the employee name, and then you can select from a drop-down box whether the value is going to be the yearly salary of that personnel or an hourly rate. And that would match up with whatever you chose to write into your budget. Gosh darn it. Well, I guess you don't need to see me. So you would select one of the two of those, and then you would put their total salary It's total salary, correct, Chad? Not the total amount that they're getting paid by the grant?
Yep, annual salary.
Annual salary, okay. And then the fringe similarly can either be a percentage of that salary or just a flat rate, like $1,500 for the year or whatever. Then you would put a date range, and this date range would be captured by that date range on the cover sheet that I just showed you. The total amount of hours that they worked, the total amount of hours that they worked under the grant. And then this column will auto-populate as a percentage of the numbers that you just filled in. And then you'll have to write some brief notes on the activities that were performed as they relate to your contract, in terms of the eligible time that was spent by that employee that will be reimbursed. So for example, you would do that for as many employees as worked on the grant for that whatever period of time. This is just an example showing, instead of salary, an hourly rate, and instead of percentage of salary, a flat rate. And then by filling out these tabs down at the bottom, they will auto-populate this personnel summary on the last tab. And you would then fill out these yellow boxes. You would sign, which is just your verification that the employees worked the number of hours and on the activities that you stated that they did. And then you would send this document as an attachment in your reimbursement request email. So hopefully that answers your question, Lou.
Are these going to be sent in on sorry?
I was just going to add to see if we can do this monthly instead of 13-week period. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The 13 weeks is just, that's kind of a random number of rows that was put in the document, but you can do it on a monthly or a quarterly basis, might make sense. Whatever works best. Do you have anything to add to that, Chad?
Yeah, no, whatever works for your entity is what works for us here. It's not too much of an issue if we have monthly reimbursements coming in from entities. So feel free, and if you want to let me know too, like, hey, look out for a reimbursement for me in about a week, I can better plan around that reimbursement and like tailor my schedule to make sure that you guys get your reimbursements processed and reviewed timely.
And the exact same will go for the travel reimbursement as well. There would be that Excel file that you would download from our website. If you have trouble with that, just email us and we can send it to you. But you would fill it out in a very similar manner as what we just walked through, and you would attach that as proof of your travel expenses that you're requesting for reimbursement or match. Go ahead, Claire. I think you're muted.
That work? That
Yep.
work? Okay. So for our proposal, we had submitted our owner's salary as part of our matching documents. We're a pretty seasonal business, so like we'll work for free in winter and then we get reimbursed in the summer. Do we have to submit for the matching requirements in equal proportion to whatever the grant reimbursement cost is? How do you recommend we handle that?
That's a great question. Chad, do you want to take that one or do you want me to go?
I guess for matching portion there, well, it's how you guys expend costs there for your project, and so your owner is going to be working not regularly through the year, but like more so during the summer. Is that correct, or is it the other way around?
We work all year long and we get paid in the summer.
So then you would just submit the document during the summer when those funds have left your account and gone into your personal account, if that's how it works. So
okay, so we submit our match when the funds are expended.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not looking for a 1-to-1 match or a 75-25 match. kind of in unison. It's just when those funds are expended as they were outlined in your contract, then you would submit that documentation.
But we can submit for reimbursement for the items that we're purchasing
prior to having enough match.
Yeah.
Is what you're asking? Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. And also, I will just one quick note, the personnel Excel that was sent to you in that package of files, there was a calculation error, so Chad will be sending you a new one later today or tomorrow. Tracy, go ahead. You're muted, Tracy. Okay. We can't hear you, so we will circle back. Okay, this is probably the most complicated part, but again, we're here to help you make these calculations if it's proving to be difficult. So indirect costs are just a function of your direct costs. We use a calculation to determine the amount of indirect costs that kind of align or accrue as you accrue direct costs. And so this is the calculation that you would use to determine how much indirect costs are available to either request as for reimbursement or contribute towards your match. So you can do this as kind of a back of the envelope calculation and send us a picture of that. Or you can use the indirect calculator, which is included on the grant management tool, which I'll walk you through right now, which does that calculation for you. But just kind of for your understanding, this would be a function of the sum of whatever personnel, fringe, travel, supplies, contractual, or other costs are included in a particular reimbursement. It would be that sum times the 10% de minimis rate, which most of you are using, otherwise your federally negotiated indirect cost rate if you have your own rate. So I will share the grant management tool now. So this is the indirect calculator. It's the second tab in this file. Again, this file is optional. You can decide to use it. You can decide to not use it. But this is a really helpful tool that Chad made in order to calculate your indirect costs for you. So I guess I will also have to share my screen. It's proving more difficult than I thought it would be. We don't want that one. Oh, geez, Louise. Okay, so just 1 second, Claire, sorry. Okay, so on the left-hand side, we have the cover sheet, which we've already been through. On the right-hand side, we have the grant management tool on the indirect calculator tab. So how you use this is you go through, you fill out your detail sheet, you list all of your expenses, they auto-populate on your cover sheet, and then you would copy the numbers from this grant funds column into the indirect calculator. So we have our $320 that were expended for personnel, our $25 expended towards fringe, and then this would actually be half of the total amount that we spent on. Oh no, wait, this would be the, yeah.
Yep.
This would be the grant funds expended on equipment. And you can see that this row is not part of the calculation. Equipment and construction are excluded from the calculation that determines your indirect costs. So it doesn't even really matter if we input that or not, but for the sake of the example, we're putting it in. And then this auto calculate, oh, you put your indirect rate in as well. So that would be usually 10% unless you have your own rate. Then it would calculate your indirect costs that can be used then as either reimbursed funds or match funds. So you would take this value and you would move it on over to this column here. And then it would add to your total reimbursement request for this period of time.
If you go onto the detail sheet, you'll see that there's an indirect expense column, and then there's the indirect invoice. And then I just wrote a brief, and this is fine too for your entities. If you want to write down the brief breakdown of your indirect expenses, or I'm sorry, your direct expenses that are applicable to indirect, which would be $345.15, and then times by the de minimis rate. And then that's the kind of, I guess, like napkin calculation that Grace was talking about. And if you go to the scroll to the right, Grace, and then I just put in the grant. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
No, you're good. And then I just put it into the grant fund section there. And again, you can split it up accordingly for your grant.
Okay. Claire, do you have another question? Or is your hand still up from the previous question? You're on mute again.
No, it's still, my hand never went down. I'm sorry, I don't.
No worries. Tommy?
Two questions. One, a lot of our match is through the depreciation of our pack and storage facility.
Mm-hmm.
How will we be showing verification of that? Will that be through like a income and loss statement showing the depreciation on our books, or how would you like that submitted to you?
That's a great question.
Yep. Depreciate what you mentioned there would be just fine.
Okay. That's what I assumed. And then my second question on that is, with how I believe you withhold a certain percentage of funds at the end until the grant is completed. Because we're doing depreciation, it will take us the full life of the grant to hit that match. Am I assuming correctly then that we would have to, even if it's all equipment that we're buying immediately within the next 3 to 6 months, we would have to wait to be reimbursed on that for then 2.5 years?
That is another excellent question. Chad, unless you have a very specific knowledge about this that you want to share now, we may have to touch base with you after the presentation. Maybe we'll chat with finance and see if we can come up with something that works for both of us, so then you don't have to wait 3 years.
The situation you described might, I think, we can talk about it later there. I'll put that in my notes.
Roger. I'll just email you after this meeting, and we can start to just discuss what the options are.
Sounds good. Yeah, that's a good point. Not something that I had thought of. Jackie?
Yeah, I just have a question about equipment purchases. Can you hear me okay?
I think so.
Okay. The question is, can you submit partial requests for whole pieces of equipment? So some require a deposit, and then 12 months later, you're going to get the equipment.
Yes, that would be fine, unless Chad wants to correct me.
So you would have to wait. There's like a lead time on that piece of equipment, but you already paid it.
Correct. Yeah.
Yep. Nope. That's fine.
You're paying it, upfront, and then there's an iterative payment, and then when you receive it.
Okay. Yeah. Nope. That sounds good. Sorry, it's just difficult to hear.
As long as you,
my fault.
As long as you submit like some description of, we're not requesting the full price of the equipment at this time because we haven't yet paid it, but we're requesting reimbursement for the deposit, which has already been put down, and then the proper documentation, including the invoice for the deposit, and then the fact that the funds have been transferred from your account to pay the deposit, that would be just fine.
Yep.
Great, thank you.
Lou?
We spent a lot of time on the application process for this grant, way back from last year. Can you accumulate all that time and then submit that for reimbursement?
Unfortunately not, because it wasn't within the period of performance. So it needs to be within the time period that your contract encapsulates, which starts after you've already been awarded. So basically, we can't pay you for anything, any expenses that were incurred or any time that was spent prior to being awarded for the grant.
So does that
It-
include
Is-
our NOA says the start date was in March?
June.
May 31st.
Oh.
Mhm.
So even
May
though our
30.
NOA starts in May, we still can't do any expenses until now?
Your expenses can go back to May 31st. That's correct, right, Chad?
May 30th,
Yeah,
24.
Yeah, we wrote the contracts in such a way there that we can capture like any possible expenditures that might have accidentally happened there. What we're looking at for in terms of personnel and what they worked is what's been listed on the contract. If you wrote in the contract that you were working on, revisions to the application, that's fine. Then that would be grounds for reimbursement. But if it's not written in the contract, the type of work that you're doing as part of the RFSI grant, then unfortunately we would not be able to reimburse. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Yep.
Okay,
And
and then
and
go ahead.
sorry, and that's where indirect kind of comes in and helps you guys out a little bit. So if you have indirect on there, then hopefully that acts as a form of reimbursement for some of that work.
And then just to reiterate what I just showed between those two Excel sheets. So you would put the grant funds from the cover sheet into the indirect calculator, and then whatever figure it calculates, you would then input back into the indirect section of the reimbursement cover sheet. That's what those arrows are depicting. Julie?
Yes, I had a question regarding reimbursement for any construction costs. If those, and they would be indirect match on it, or I'm sorry, match on it. But if, can we go back then to May 31 for those?
As long as it's in your, as long as it's something that was contracted,
Okay.
like it's
okay.
written in your
Yep.
contract.
Okay. Okay. That's great news. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, and then this is a slide that I created like 10 minutes before the presentation started, but this is basically just to outline, we understand that prices will change if they haven't already from what you had initially budgeted. And so we are looking at the different budget categories, kind of like different buckets. So the total amount of funds that you were awarded to cover all of the costs listed in all of the different buckets will not change. That's pretty obvious. However, funds within each bucket can be reallocated with little restriction. So for example, if one piece of equipment miraculously decreased by $1,500, you can use that $1,500 towards the piece of equipment that increased in value, or in price. And that there's very little restriction on what can and can't be done within a bucket. However, if you're looking to reallocate funds between buckets, so for example, you're not traveling anymore to pick up the piece of equipment, but your construction cost has gone up. So you want to reallocate money from travel to construction. That's usually okay. However, anything greater than 10% of your total funds awarded, moving that between categories or between buckets would require a contract amendment. So again, please, if any changes are happening, big or small, it's best practice to just reach out to us as soon as you know of those changes, and we can talk you through the simplest way to go about capturing whatever change will be occurring, whether that's hiring a different contractor than you had initially put in your budget, whether that's getting a slightly different piece of equipment or reallocating money from one bucket to another bucket. Any change, please just let us know. We're going to try to avoid contract amendments, obviously, wherever possible, but in many of these cases, your contract will have to be amended, and we'll walk you through that process as quickly and easily as possible. Okay. Are there any more reimbursement questions that people have right now that you want to ask? Otherwise, we can save anything else that comes up for the Q&A. Okay, awesome. Moving into performance reporting. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just put a question in the chat as well. I'm just curious, like if we, let's say, we have like a truck in our budget and for like 50,000, but those prices can be really variable. Let's say we've got one for 40,000 and it's still a good truck and fits our needs. And we have that $10,000 savings, which is, pretty significant. If we wanted to buy something different with that, would that require an amendment? Like if it was a new piece of equipment that's not in the award?
Yes, it would. So new things that are being introduced to a budget will almost always require a contract amendment. I can't off the top of my head think of anything that wouldn't require a contract amendment for something new being introduced. If it doesn't represent a change to the scope of your project, we will hopefully be able to do that amendment without the USDA having to review that item. However, if it is kind of questionable, or if it at all changes the scope of your project, the nature of your project, then we would have to run that by USDA for a review of whatever that new introduction would be. Tommy, did you put a hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up to Matt's question. If say we have multiple of one item in our budget and we say we're going to buy 2 of something and we end up buying 3, would that require an amendment, or would that be like a similar project? Like say it's just the same exact item, just more of them, and it still fits in the cost budget. Would that require an amendment?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, thank you.
It's like I said, it's best practice to just reach out to us and say, hey, instead of 2 refrigerator doors, we need 3. Just let us know, but that should be pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it's more so when you're introducing a new variable into the contract that we have to just review and most likely require a contract amendment. But the contract amendment process there has been streamlined now in DATCAP, so we'd be able to move that along pretty quickly. Just as a heads up, it takes usually 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay, we can go over any other reimbursement questions that come up at the end, but we'll jump into performance reporting. When we talk about performance reporting, when we use that term, it's kind of an umbrella term that includes 2 different types of reports, both the progress report and the final report. You all should have the progress report template. I believe that was included in the folder that Chad sent. It will also be available for download on the website. The final report template is still in progress. We're exploring the most effective metrics and methods to evaluate the impact of the RFSI program. And as we're doing so, I just wanted to note that we welcome your input as we develop that report. It's certainly a priority to aggregate data that is not burdensome for you to collect and report, and which may be useful to you and your organization. So if you have any thoughts on that as we're developing, we would certainly welcome them. The reporting schedule, and this is aligned with the schedule of DATCAP's reporting to the USDA because we use your reporting information to complete our own reports. The first due date will be on June 15th of this year, and that will cover the beginning of your project through May 15th. And similarly, the subsequent reports are due a month after the reporting period has ended. So the final report is due no later than June 1st of 2027 or within 60 days of completion of your project for the final reimbursement. So your final reimbursement is withheld until we've received your final report, which doesn't necessarily have to wait until June 1st. If you complete your project, let's say at the end of 2026, you can get that report into us and we can get you your final reimbursement. Progress reporting is about much more than simply letting us know that you've purchased a piece of equipment, for example. This program is designed to yield positive outcomes and development in Wisconsin's food supply chain. And we want to know how your purchases and expenditures and work are working towards the goals of the program. The purposes of a semi-annual progress report include communicating progress made towards the completion of RFSI projects to DATCAP, identifying areas DATCAP can support grant recipients, evaluating and reflecting on past and future project successes, challenges, expenditures, and impact, and finally preparing information for the final performance report. And then, like I said, they will be read, they will be used, the data will be aggregated, so that we can share information on the Wisconsin RFSI program to USDA as part of our own reporting requirement. Okay, I'm just going to briefly walk through the report. Hopefully you can see that. All right, so this is the report that you'll use to complete each of your semi-annual progress reports. Some just brief information about the grant and the purposes of the report. And then you would enter information about your organization, your contract number, etc. You would select the infrastructure grant box and put in a little bit of information about the period of performance that the report covers. So we would ask that you report on approximately the total percentage of the work that has been completed to date on your project, including a brief overview of what's been completed.
I'm gonna scream at someone when they're like, we don't know how to do this, which is like the next thing I get to deal with.
I think someone's unmuted.
Oh, I know they are.
Part. Or they're telling people that's the protocol.
Oh, Katrina, you're unmuted.
Who deal with it?
Okay, so listing your accomplishments and activities, any challenges or deviations from your work plan, and then this fun table that we all remember from the application, you're going to be asked to list the expected numbers that were included in your proposal, and then the actual numbers to date. So those are the cumulative totals on each of the indicators from the beginning of your project until whenever you're completing this report. If you have any questions on what any of these things specifically mean, feel free to reach out to us. I tried to include some more specific information and guidance on what each of the items is referring to, because I know that there was a lot of confusion during the application process about what these things specifically were referring to. So hopefully my notes help you out. If not, just give me a call. And then it will ask you to talk about your expenditures to date. Again, that's cumulative. Any upcoming activities, and then any optional feedback that you have for us. Okay, this is the last section of the presentation before we move into any remaining questions that you all have, and maybe we can get out a little bit early. So this is a document that I created. It's called the Financing Resources document. It's on the webpage. Because this is a reimbursement-based grant, as are all DATCAP grants, it means that awarded organizations will need to cash flow purchases upfront prior to receiving grant funds. And we understand that this will be difficult or even impossible for some without reliable access to loans or financing options. So that's kind of the point of this document. It's a collection, a directory, if you will, of Wisconsin-based community development financial institutions that identify some sources of capital and bridge loan financing to fund your grant purchases prior to receiving reimbursement. So these lenders serve particular demographic groups and business or organization structures, and they all support the types of purchases or expenditures that you all will be making related to the RFSI program. So just an option to look through if this is something that you think you may need additional resources on. If you have any questions on that, again, just let us know. The website is your biggest resource. It lists all of the resources that we've talked about today. It lists some links to outside organizations that may be able to provide some support or information. The press releases are now linked on the website, as well as the full lists of both equipment-only grantees and infrastructure grantees. And then anytime we post something significant to the website, we'll probably send an email update just so that you know that it's been posted. But essentially everything that you should need will be available at the DACCAP RFSI webpage. And then we wanted to outline or highlight some terms within your contract. This is not a comprehensive list of the terms, obviously, but it includes some of the more relevant provisions in your contract. So first, it's the subrecipient's responsibility to notify us of any change to your contract's primary contact as soon as possible. So if your organization gets a new executive director or there's a new grants person, please let us know as soon as possible so then we can make changes in our contact lists and be sure that the appropriate person is being contacted. Reimbursement payments will be suspended if performance reports aren't submitted on time and or the grantee cannot provide evidence of performance of contracted activities. We're not foreseeing any issues with that, but we wanted to state it. The federal grant rules dictate requirements on how to properly manage and dispose, which means sell or otherwise get rid of equipment purchased with grant funds. You don't even have your equipment yet, so this is not going to be an issue for, we hope, a long time, but there are specific federal laws that dictate how you dispose of equipment. So contact us in the future for case-specific instructions. Sometimes you don't have to do anything. For example, if the piece of equipment has depreciated beyond a certain amount or percentage. But in some cases, if there's kind of like an early disposition of a piece of equipment, it may require some funds to be sent back to USDA, which we hope we don't have to do. It's the subrecipient's responsibility to provide insurance coverage for equipment purchased with grant funds and to retain all data and records relating to the grant award agreement for at least 3 years from the submission of the final report. That includes any and all documentation that's created as you're administering this grant. Just keep it in a file somewhere. And then similarly, records for equipment specifically that's acquired with the support of federal funds must be retained for 3 years after its final disposition. So that's a longer term requirement. It's a subrecipient's obligation to provide grant performance data, reports, projects, and project surveys as requested by DACCAP, even beyond the completion of the contract. DACCAP reserves the right to conduct site visits and monitor projects. It's a subrecipient's responsibility to submit a verified statement accounting for the use of all grant funds received. And that would be by a CPA at the very end, like with the closeout of your grant. We have some more information coming soon on this, but there was a provision that was kind of brought to our attention by one of you on the affirmative action compliance under the Department of Administration. So we're putting together some guidance on that, working with the legal and finance bureaus to make sure that we're in compliance. And then contract amendments, we've talked about that already, but basically bottom line is just to let us know of any changes as soon as you know, and then we can go from there. And then a couple things coming soon. We have the desire and the resources to make this a program that's more robust than simply fulfilling the transactions of issuing reimbursements and collecting performance reports. I think human relationships, talking to one another, is as much a part of the supply chain as cold storage. So I would love to introduce some grantee virtual office hours, maybe once per month, per quarter, bi-monthly, just as a time for people to convene and discuss their projects, offer support and resources to one another, get questions answered by our team, etc. We have these calls with the grant administrators throughout the country with USDA once every 2 weeks, which we wouldn't do it that often, but they're really helpful just to chat about what's going on. And sometimes it can be really helpful to hear what other people are working on and doing and their solutions. So hoping to introduce that, as well as like a listserv style communication channel, again, to put people in touch. And I know that there's a lot of similar work being done in all of your projects. And so I think that it would be great to be able to communicate on what you've done or what you're looking to do, maybe having the chance to see certain pieces of equipment or commercial kitchens in action if you're a little bit behind in terms of your progress on your project, things like that. So anyway, keep an eye out for that. And then also just wanted to mention that we are in the process of getting some grant software for our team in the Department of Ag. So that will impact your grants down the line in a very positive way. It will hopefully streamline a lot of these processes so we don't have to work with a million Excel spreadsheets, but we'll get you up to speed with that hopefully towards the end of this calendar year as soon as all of that has been set up. Would anyone, I mean, yeah, ideas are always welcome. I want to know if you think that you would make use of these opportunities. If not, I'll just drop it. But yeah, your input is always welcome. And that's all that we have for you. So any questions or comments would be very welcome. Otherwise, we can let you go.
I just want to say thank you, Grace, for the presentation there. Great job.
Thanks so much. You all have been really helpful through this whole process. We appreciate you.
Completely second that statement. Thank you, the team, for everything at DATCAP, for what you've done.
I have a quick question that's sort of more policy oriented. Is there been any discussion or concern with the change in administration about this particular grant program getting clawed back by the feds?
It's a great question. One that we have brought up with the USDA and haven't gotten any sort of feedback from them on. It would require, to my knowledge, an act of Congress to basically reallocate these funds to something else. We have no concerns. Anything is possible, I guess, is what I would say. But we haven't heard anything or have any specific concerns that this program would end come the new administration. But it's a good question.
From
Grace and
a
Chad,
conversation.
Sorry. This is Aaron. My name's Aaron O'Neill. I'm one of the attorneys at DATCAP. There's a question in the chat about whether they have to comply with, the recipients have to comply with Davis-Bacon while they're paying contractors. And the answer is no, Davis-Bacon does not apply to these funds.
Are there any other questions in the chat that have not yet been answered? Alyssa, go ahead.
Hi, I just had a question about, for new construction, are there any other NEPA requirements that we should be aware of, or was that covered with that NEPA questionnaire this spring?
We're really hoping that that was it. We think that that was it. I mean, your contracts have all been approved at this point. So any other major change to your construction would theoretically be subject to a NEPA review, but we're not anticipating approving any major changes to construction. So I think that that's all behind us.
Thanks.
Feel free to raise your hand if there was a question in the chat that didn't get answered. I haven't been monitoring it, but it looks like Chad's been doing a pretty good job of answering those. and I don't see any other hands raised, so I think we might be good to call it. Again, thank you for your time and attention and effort. And we are really excited about this program and all of your projects. So best of luck, and let us know if there's anything that we can do to support you.
Thank you.
You want to go?